Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you're all doing great. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing folks from all over the place tuning in. The low hum of a stalled engine broke the stillness of the lakeside road, cutting through the crisp morning air like a reluctant sigh. Ethan Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Biotech and one of the most sought-after minds in medical innovation, sat behind the wheel of a luxury SUV, glaring at the dashboard as if it had personally betrayed him. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who'd once delivered keynote speeches about the future of regenerative medicine now found himself stranded somewhere outside Pine Hill, a quiet, time-worn town nestled beside Lake Ridge. He was en route to a private board retreat meant to chart the next 5-year trajectory for the company he built from scratch. But now, thanks to a blinking engine light and an overheating radiator, his plans were on pause. With a sigh, Ethan stepped out into the cool morning, adjusting the cuffs of his wool coat. The scent of pine and diesel lingered in the air. A few hundred feet down the road, an old wooden sign swung gently in the breeze, Samson's Auto and Tire. It looked like something out of Norman Rockwell painting. The paint had faded, the windows were dusty, and an antique gas pump stood near the entrance like a relic from another time. Ethan hesitated, then locked his car and headed toward the garage. Inside, the faint clink of metal echoed from the service bay. A wiry mechanic in his 60s looked up from beneath a rusted Chevy truck. "Morning, friend," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Engine trouble?" "Overheated," Ethan replied. "Radiator, maybe. I'm not sure." "You're in luck. This old place doesn't look like much, but she's never failed a traveler yet. I'm Carl. Give me 10 to take a look." Ethan nodded, stepping aside to let Carl work. That's when he saw her. She was sitting quietly in a plastic chair near the window, cradling a paper cup of coffee as if it were the only warm thing in the world. A fleece-lined denim jacket hung loosely around her shoulders, and one leg was stretched forward, its movement slightly stiff. A glint of metal peeked from beneath her cuffed jeans, a prosthetic limb, worn but well-maintained. Ethan might have looked away out of politeness, but her gaze caught his before he could. Steady, calm, unapologetically direct. "Bad day for a breakdown," she said, offering a slight smile. Ethan smiled politely. "Seems so, though I guess there are worse places to get stuck." She chuckled. Her laugh was low and warm, the kind that lingered. "Depends who you ask. Some folks say this town hasn't changed since the 80s. Personally, I think it just learned what matters and stuck with it." There was something arresting about her, not just the prosthetic or the graceful way she shifted her weight to adjust her seat, but the quiet dignity in how she held herself. Like she'd endured storms and still stood tall, unshaken. "Ava Morgan," she offered, extending a hand. He took it. Her grip was firm, grounded. "Ethan Caldwell." Something flickered in her expression, recognition maybe, or surprise. But it passed just as quickly. "What brings you through Pine Hill, mister?" "Caldwell," she asked. He hesitated. Most people he met already knew who he was before he opened his mouth. But here, in this garage filled with the scent of oil and burnt coffee, he felt anonymous. Strangely, he liked it. "Passing through on business," he said vaguely. Ava nodded, as if she sensed his need for discretion and was willing to grant it. "Carl's the best in town. He helped retrofit my socket 2 years ago when a local clinic botched the fit. Swore he wasn't an expert, but fixed it better than the specialists." Ethan glanced down. "Your prosthetic. It's Thompson Gen 2? With a custom mod?" Now Ava raised a brow. Not many people can ID a prosthetic model at a glance. "You in the field?" He smiled just a little. "Let's say I used to be more hands-on." Before she could press further, Carl returned, wiping grease from his palms. "Well, radiator's shot. Hose cracked, coolant's bone dry. I can get the part in by tomorrow afternoon." Ethan checked his watch. "And the nearest car rental?" Carl winced. 40 miles east. And their last cars probably being used for prom night. He sighed. "Of course." Ava stood, carefully balancing herself. "If you need a lift to town, I was heading that way. Could use the company. Unless you're allergic to 2004 hatchbacks and off-key singing." Ethan blinked, then smiled. "I'll take my chances." Outside, the sun had risen higher, casting golden light over the lake. The trees rustled softly in the wind, and the town of Pine Hill carried on at its own gentle pace. As they climbed into her car, a dusty blue hatchback that smelled faintly of lavender and motor oil, Ethan found himself strangely at ease. He didn't know much about Ava Morgan. Not yet. But in a life built on precision, ambition, and relentless forward motion, she was the first unexpected variable he didn't want to solve. As she turned the ignition, the radio crackled to life with an old Sam Cooke song. Ava hummed softly, her fingers tapping the steering wheel. And for the first time in a very long while, Ethan Caldwell, the man who was always rushing somewhere, felt no urgency at all. He just wanted to listen. And maybe, just maybe, stay a while. The Millionaire's Heart and the Forgotten Dream. The sun was setting softly over the lakeside town, casting long golden shadows across the narrow road that led out of the old garage, where Ethan Caldwell still stood, motionless, long after the short conversation with Ava Morgan had ended. His car engine was already running, but he hadn't left. Something held him there, a feeling he couldn't quite name, strange, yet familiar. Like a part of his heart had just brushed against a memory buried deep for far too long. Throughout his career, Ethan had been known as a cold mind, a man of logic, data, and strategy. But those brief moments with Ava had cracked that shell. In her eyes, brave yet undeniably tired, he saw a reflection of his younger self, starting out with nothing but dreams and doubt. When he offered her a ride home, Ava gently declined, saying her place was nearby and she could walk. But Ethan had seen her leg, the prosthetic just barely visible beneath her pant leg, and he could tell every small movement brought pain. MS. Ava, he hesitated, I don't want to intrude, but if you ever need help with that device, I could take a look. I used to work in this field. Ava looked surprised. Are you a prosthetist? Ethan let out a soft chuckle and shook his head. No, not exactly. I just used to build a few things, then sold the company to folks better at marketing than me. She studied him for a long second. The wind played gently with her brown hair, and Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. She didn't ask more, just nodded. If you're free tomorrow. The next morning, Ethan returned to the old garage, carrying a bag of medical components he'd never thrown away, even after stepping out of the industry. He had once developed a shock-absorbing system made from cheap but durable materials, designed to help people like Ava walk with less pain, without needing thousands of dollars. When he walked in, Ava was already there, seated on an old wooden chair in the corner, holding a warm mug of tea. She looked up and gave a soft smile. Not joy, exactly, but a quiet sense of understanding. You really came back. I said I would. Ethan replied, setting his bag down. I brought a few things. Not market ready, but they might reduce pressure on the knee joint and help with elasticity in your stride. Would you let me take a look at the socket? Ava hesitated. Letting someone handle an artificial limb wasn't easy, especially when you're used to pitiful stares. But Ethan didn't look at her that way. He looked at her the way an engineer looks at a system with potential, not pity, not judgment. Okay, but if something goes wrong, I'll take full responsibility. They worked in silence. Ethan carefully removed the joint connector, inspected where patterns, adjusted the angles, and replaced a few shock-absorbing rings with his custom prototypes. He didn't ask many questions, and Ava didn't share much either. Yet in that quiet space, something unspoken started to mend between them. When she took her first step, Ava wobbled a bit, but then steadied herself. Try walking a few steps, Ethan encouraged gently. She walked, slow at first, steady, then a little quicker. Her face shifted, surprise breaking through. She turned around, eyes wide. It doesn't hurt, not like before. Ethan smiled, still holding his tool pouch. It's still rough around the edges. But if you'll let me, I can make a better version. Or even redesign it to fit your frame perfectly. Ava sat down, her hands slightly trembling. Why are you doing this for me, Ethan? I'm not used to being given so much. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then replied with a warmth in his voice that surprised even him. Maybe I forgot why I started. I used to build these things to help people. But the more successful I got, the further I drifted from that goal. Meeting you, watching you walk with so much resilience. It reminded me why I picked up a screwdriver in the first place. Ava didn't say anything. She simply reached out her hand. Ethan took it, a gentle grasp, no strings attached, but filled with promise. So, if I gave you a chance to start over, I consider it the greatest privilege I've ever had. The midday sun poured through the dusty garage windows, casting soft shadows over the two figures sitting side by side. A millionaire who'd lost touch with his first dream. A woman who'd learned to stand again after loss. And between them, no more distance. Only the soft tap of tools, quiet laughter, and the start of something new just beginning. The first winter wind slipped through the rusted slats of the garage door, prompting Ethan to pull his collar tighter around his neck. Inside the workshop, the only warmth came from a halogen lamp loosely hung from the ceiling and the sparks flying from his welding torch. In the corner, Ava sat on a thin cushion, her eyes following his every move, hands gently turning a paper cup of hot cocoa she'd brought from the cafe down the street. The prosthetic leg lay on the old wooden table, carefully disassembled. The steel joints were worn, the rubber padding stiff and cracked from years of use. But on the fresh sketch Ethan had drawn just yesterday, a completely different structure had emerged. More flexible, lighter, and, most importantly, capable of adjusting to real human motion with precision. You really used to design these? Ava asked softly, her voice barely louder than the wind whispering through the tin roof. Ethan set the torch down, pushed up his safety goggles, and looked at her. A long time ago, before I sold my first company. Back then, I just wanted to help a friend in the army. He lost his left leg in an accident in Kandahar. And then you became a millionaire. Ava smiled faintly, though something behind her eyes hinted it wasn't just admiration. Ethan gave a small nod, not denying it. He wasn't one to pretend. I developed a feedback sensor joint system. Simple, reparable, and far cheaper than what the market was offering. But after the company was bought out, they turned it into something only the wealthy could afford. That's when I walked away, left the whole field behind. Until you met me. Ava finished for him, setting her cocoa down. A broke woman with a busted prosthetic and a cheap paper coffee cup. Ethan looked at her, steady. Not because you're broke, but because your eyes never asked for pity. You just wanted someone to see you, for real. Ava was silent. In the dim yellow light and the ticking of an old wall clock, they sat together. A man who had walked away from his dreams, and a woman who had no choice but to keep walking forward on willpower alone. No more words were needed. Something deep had cracked open between them, like spring water finding a way through stone, quiet but unstoppable. In the nights that followed, the workshop became their private world. Ethan slept less, rose earlier, his mind reignited with every insight Ava offered. She shared what it felt like, numbness from standing too long, the faint clicking with each step, how she leaned slightly to the right to stay balanced. Every detail became data, helping Ethan tweak the design. We need to cut down friction here, he said one evening, pointing to the socket's joint. And add a coil spring here. It'll disperse weight more evenly. Ava laughed. All I know is it makes my back hurt by nightfall. You're turning that into some kind of space project. That's why I need you, Ethan said gently. You're the part one always left out in my designs. The truth is, I never really understood the user until now. Ava looked down, hiding a shy smile. I've never seen a CEO welding prosthetics late into a freezing night with messy hair and grease-stained sleeves. You calling me sloppy? No. She looked up again. I'm saying it's real. Ethan let out his first deep laugh in days. The warm, resonant sound echoed through the garage, softening the harsh edges of the place. He handed her a small circuit board embedded with a motion sensor. This is the heart of the new design. It'll learn from your movements step by step. And you? Ava asked, half playful, half curious. What's your heart learning? Ethan paused, looking at her for a long moment. Maybe how to feel again, how to trust, how to start over after years of not letting myself get attached. She didn't reply, but when he presented the test frame, she placed a steadying hand on his shoulder to rise and fit it. For the first time, Ethan didn't see Ava as someone in need, but as a true partner, someone with courage and silent trust. That night, long after Ava had gone home, Ethan remained in the garage. He opened an old engineering notebook, its pages still marked with sloppy notes from college. One line stood out, scrawled across the top. Technology with heart is the only kind that lasts. It was a motto he once lived by, lost beneath spreadsheets, shareholder meetings, and boardroom deals. Now, in this makeshift shop, beside a woman who felt like someone he'd known his whole life, Ethan rediscovered it. He scribbled a new line into the margin. Start small, build for one, and change everything. He looked up at the prototype glowing under the halogen light. And in his heart, something had begun to grow, quietly but powerfully. A whisper in her eyes. The next morning, as the mist still blanketed the ground around Lake Millbrook, Ethan was already in the workshop. His shirt sleeves were rolled up for what must have been the 10th time his hands, smeared with grease, and not a hint of regret in his eyes. Across from him, Ava sat on a worn stool, working intently on the control interface through her old ThinkPad, its corners chipped, its keys faded by time. Yet Ethan noticed the way she moved, precise, fluid, as if the machine were an extension of her. She's not just someone using mobility gear, Ethan thought to himself. She's an engineer, one who chose to go anonymous. When Ava stood to move toward the testing rig, Ethan instinctively stepped forward and gently took her hand, his voice soft but steady. Ava, I think it's time we stop pretending. She hesitated. For a second, her eyes widened, as if the frost behind her lenses had melted in a flash of fire. She didn't say a word, just nodded, and then she told him. It wasn't just her prosthetic she knew. She had designed it, selected the materials, mapped the user interface, modeled the biomechanics. Before the car accident, Ava Morgan had been director of product development at Strategenic Devices, Ethan's former rival in the medical tech world. The accident changed everything, and the ghost from that past had pushed her into retreat, from the industry, from ambition, from admiration. She became Ava Morgan, the woman learning how to walk slower, how to face looks of pity instead of awe. Ethan listened to every word. No interruptions, no pity, just deep respect. In her eyes, he saw a version of himself from years ago. Crushed passion, a broken name, and the suffocating weight of grief that once stripped him of his ability to believe. You're scared of your old self, aren't you? Ava asked gently. I used to drown in the title of CEO, Ethan admitted. I built products to meet deadlines, not to meet people. Well, now you're building something for a person, she said, voice calm but unwavering. Her words hit him like a quiet revelation. Ava had awakened something in him, something buried under years of spreadsheets, investors, and polished press releases. His heartbeat quickened. He looked at her, his gaze lingering, considering. Then he simply said, we'll design it from the ground up. Ava, not like the old ones. Not like anything from any company. Just for you. And for people like you. Ava bit her lip. In that glance, Ethan didn't just see her passion return. He saw trust. And for the first time in years, that trust was mutual. We'll design it together, she said. Not just a prosthetic. A doorway. In the warm glow of the aging workshop, two silhouettes worked side by side. Not just assembling mechanical parts, but laying the foundation for something entirely new. What they were building wasn't just a device. It was a shared purpose, reborn. And somewhere in that shared silence, one question lingered. What happens when pain and passion collide? Ethan didn't know. Ava didn't either. But what they did know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, was this. They had started believing in each other. The invisible distance. Ethan stood frozen in the workshop, hands still resting on the back of the wooden chair Ava had just vacated. She had walked away, softly, deliberately, her first steps on the fully customized prosthetic so seamless, so confident, they had taken his breath away. The way she lifted her chin, walked with new conviction. No crutch, no hesitation. He'd nearly forgotten to breathe when she turned to face him after that almost kiss. But then she'd stepped back toward the door, smiled faintly, and whispered, I need some time. And time had passed, 3 days of silence. No texts, no calls, not even a single line in the email drafts they once shared. While Ethan's technical team began prepping the mold for a potential production line, his mind remained focused on only one thing: Ava and the unspoken words he had seen in her eyes. On the fourth morning, Ethan arrived at the shop earlier than usual. He made 2 cups of coffee, even though he knew there was a good chance no one else would show up. The ceiling light flickered as always, and the scent of heated metal clung to the air. He remembered the look on Ava's face the first time she stood with the finished prosthetic, how she stared at it like it was a miracle, barely managing to whisper, "I didn't think I'd ever walk like a regular person again." He'd almost said something then, but didn't. His heart had spoken first, racing, pressing every breath into the space between them. And Ava, with that backward glance and lips pressed tight, had chosen to walk away. That same afternoon, as Ethan adjusted a new sensor into the prosthetic joint, the workshop doors suddenly creaked open. Ava stood there, wearing her leather jacket and holding a familiar paper coffee cup. One hand trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady again. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly, setting the cup beside him. Ethan turned toward her, about to speak, but she cut in. When someone loses a part of their body, they don't just lose the physical part. I lost the belief that anyone could see me beyond the leg. And when I saw that in your eyes, I panicked. Ethan stepped closer, gently holding her hand. "I see you because you're real, because you faced it, because you're brave enough to live as yourself in a world that keeps trying to make us wear masks." She smiled, lowering her gaze. "You still want to keep working on this project?" After 3 days of radio silence. "I'll only stop," Ethan said, "if you tell me we shouldn't keep going." Ava looked up, and this time there was no hesitation in her gaze. "Then let's keep going." That night, they were back in the workshop beneath the amber light, with design sketches scattered across the table. Yet a quiet stillness lingered between them, like a reminder of the moment that almost happened but never did. But this time, neither of them backed away. Ava leaned in, pointing to a new type of rotary joint. "Maybe we test this one before you send the demo to the approval board?" Ethan nodded. He reached over her shoulder to grab a wrench, his shoulder brushing against hers. Ava didn't flinch. She simply whispered, "I'm not scared anymore, Ethan. But I need you to go slow." Ethan gave a small nod, replying gently, "We'll rebuild everything. Slowly, but with certainty." And under the soft yellow glow and fading scent of warm metal, they began a new design. One that wasn't just about a leg or a hydraulic joint, but about a shared journey forward. Right there on the table, maybe love was quietly growing, crafted from the smallest, most careful details. Between wind and trust. That afternoon, the sky seemed freshly washed after the morning rain. Sunlight sparkled as it filtered through the tall pine trees encircling the lakeside town, casting dappled light on the faded metal roof of the old workshop, where 2 people from vastly different worlds had begun a journey no one could have predicted. Ethan sat at his work table, pieced together from reclaimed wood, eyes fixed on the prototype prosthetic leg resting on the display rack. His hands still bore traces of grease from the final adjustments he'd made that morning, but his mind was far away, following Ava, the woman who had stirred up a storm inside him, now gone after a successful trial run. She hadn't said much, just a handshake, eyes glistening slightly and a quiet cryptic line, "I need some time." Ethan sighed, running his hand absent-mindedly over the smooth metal surface of the device. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to do next. The creak of the door startled him. "Ava." Ethan stood up quickly, but it wasn't her. It was Charlie, the garage owner who had rented him the corner space. The old man handed him a steaming cup of coffee and squinted, as if he could see straight through Ethan. "She'll come back," Charlie said, without needing to be asked. "I saw that look once before. In my late wife's eyes, right before she realized she was walking away from something that truly mattered." Ethan offered a faint smile and thanked him, then sank back into his chair. But that simple, weathered wisdom echoed in his mind long after Charlie left. That night, Ethan didn't return to the hotel. He stayed in the shop, turned on the overhead lamp, and continued refining the sketches and schematics he and Ava had planned together. Her laughter was gone, her playful jokes about the most legendary leg tuning station in Northern California, now just a memory. Yet her presence lingered, in sticky notes left on the wall, in a worn paper coffee cup still sitting beside the blueprint scanner. Each keystroke, each new design tweak, seemed to echo her words, "Don't mass-produce this like coal machinery. Let people feel seen, respected." Ethan worked into the early morning, not out of necessity, but because his heart wouldn't settle. Just after sunrise, when the sun had barely peeked over the distant ridge, a familiar sound pulled him from his focus. A helicopter, but not like the corporate ones he used for business trips in his former life. This one bore the emblem of Caldwell Tech, the medical technology empire Ethan had founded before selling off his shares and retreating from the public eye. He stepped outside just as the helicopter landed. Wind whipped through the open doors, scattering notes across the floor. Ethan didn't bother chasing them, because stepping down from the aircraft, standing tall with eyes lit by the morning sun, was Ava. She wasn't wearing a worn hoodie or faded jeans today. She looked poised, strong, and yet, unmistakably, still the Ava he knew. Only this time, for the first time, Ethan saw the full truth reflected in her gaze. "Good morning," she said, voice as light as the breeze. Ethan chuckled softly. "I take it you're not here for more hydraulic joint adjustments." Ava walked toward him, stopping just a few steps away. "I came to ask for something else." "What's that?" "A chance to partner up. Not just to collaborate on affordable prosthetics. I want us to take this nationwide. Every model, every product should carry the spirit we built it with. People first." Ethan stood speechless. A part of him had sensed this moment coming, but hearing her say it, with such clarity, without fear, hit him harder than expected. "And one more thing," Ava added. "Everything that's happened between us, from that first paper cup of coffee to yesterday's test, it was all real." Ethan reached up, lightly touching his forehead, almost checking if he was dreaming. But the light, the wind, the slow hum of the helicopter behind her, it was all too real to deny. "So, you're now a senior advisor at Caldwell Tech?" he asked, voice still shaky. "More than that," she replied with a half smile. "You're looking at the new head of community medical devices. And if you're willing, you'll lead the design team." Ethan stared at her, long enough that she nearly lost patience. "What are you thinking?" she asked gently. "I'm thinking, how do I make this moment last forever?" An hour later, after the helicopter lifted off and flew back to a temporary office in the town center, Ethan remained in the workshop, eyes still on the spot where she had stood. In his hand was the folder Ava had left, full of contracts, independent creator clauses, and a small handwritten note at the bottom. "We're not just designing prosthetics, we're restoring trust." Ethan closed the folder. He didn't need to read more. His heart had already made the decision the moment she stepped off that helicopter. He walked back inside, flicked on the warm overhead light, and pulled up the chair Ava used to sit in. "All right then," he whispered to himself, grabbing a pencil. "If the world's ready, so are we." And in that space, still filled with the faint scent of coffee, echoes of technical debates, and a quiet laughter once shared, Ethan began drafting a new chapter. Not just for innovation, but for a heart that had finally remembered how to trust again. Courage in the storm. The first autumn wind swept through the lakeside town, carrying the scent of pine needles and mist from the still water. Inside the old workshop, the warm glow of a single yellow light spilled across unfinished prosthetic designs spread over the workbench. Ethan sat there, deep in thought, holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Ava stepped in, carrying a thick folder. She placed it firmly on the table, her voice steady and serious. "We have a problem." Ethan looked up, concern instantly flashing in his eyes. "What is it?" "A competitor leaked our design and rushed out a cheap imitation. They've been aggressively marketing it, and one of their test cases went horribly wrong. The media is attacking us, and the investor board wants to cut their losses." Ethan gripped his coffee tighter, staring at the blueprints on the table. He knew this was the moment that would test not only their resolve but their ethics. "We have to recall every faulty product. even if it costs us millions. Ava nodded, eyes unwavering. Exactly. We cannot let users lose faith in us. We started this to serve the community, not to chase profits. Ethan exhaled slowly, then stood. Then let's get to work. We'll face this storm together. In the days that followed, they worked around the clock. Ethan re-engineered the design, making sure it was safer and more effective. Ava personally reached out to customers, explained the situation, and promised full support and repairs. Together, they held a press conference, took questions head-on, and didn't deflect blame. Gradually, trust began to return. Letters of gratitude started to pour in, stories from users whose lives had changed for the better because of their prosthetics. Financially, the hit was massive. But deep down, they knew they had done the right thing. One evening, after the crisis had finally begun to settle, Ethan and Ava sat quietly in the workshop. The yellow light cast a soft glow over their tired but fulfilled faces. "Thank you, Ava," Ethan said, his voice filled with sincerity, "for staying true to what's right." Ava smiled, reaching for his hand. "We weathered the storm together, and I believe the skies ahead are going to be clear." In that moment, they both knew there would be more challenges ahead. But with courage and trust, they could face anything side by side. The scar, and the most unusual proposal. The last light of day filtered through the window panes of the newly established development center. Ethan stood still, one hand braced on his desk, eyes fixed on the screen, replaying a short video. An 8-year-old boy taking his very first steps using the prosthetic they had just completed. Applause erupted in the testing room, and the boy's joyful laughter tightened something deep in Ethan's chest. He never imagined he'd feel this again. That spark when innovation wasn't about tech advancement, but about restoring humanity. Ava had brought him back to that path. And tonight, he was finally going to do what he'd been holding back for months. He tapped the desk softly. "It's time." When Ava entered the testing room, she was surprised to find the lights dimmed, not the usual bright fluorescence. On the workbench sat a bouquet of wildflowers. Not extravagant, just simple purple blooms from the lakeside trail where they often walked after long work nights. The whiteboard, once covered with dozens of hydraulic sketches, now bore a single handwritten line. "No design could ever be more perfect than you in my life." Ava laughed, but her eyes shimmered with tears. She turned, and there was Ethan, no suit, no tie, just rolled up sleeves and eyes full of anticipation. "I know you're not one for grand gestures," he began softly, "and you've never dreamed of anything over the top. But you walked into my life like a design I never drafted. Natural, strong, irreplaceable." He opened his hand. Inside was a small box, handcrafted from polished titanium, the same material used in their first prototype knee joint. But inside wasn't a diamond ring. It was a small keychain shaped like a wing. Ava froze. That wing. She had drawn it years ago for her Freedom Limb concept when she was still head of development. The project had never come to life until now. "I'm not asking you to return to the company," Ethan continued. "I just want you by my side, as a partner, a collaborator, and if you'll have me, my wife. No pressure, no balance sheets. Just the two of us and a dream we've reignited together." Ava stood silently, not out of doubt, but to steady her voice. "I spent years hiding, thinking I wasn't whole enough to be loved," she said, stepping closer. "But then you came, not to fix me, but to walk beside me. You didn't just give me a reason to keep going. You made me want to go forward with someone." She slipped the keychain onto the fine chain she always wore. "And if you promise not to make me wear some frilly wedding gown, then yes, my answer is yes." Ethan chuckled, eyes gleaming with quiet joy. No wedding gowns, just lab coats, and fresh coffee every morning. News of their quirky wedding spread quickly through town. A CEO proposing with a titanium knee joint, a former tech executive accepting a keychain as a symbol of freedom, and a wedding held right in the workshop, amid 3D printers hanging blueprints and the familiar clang of metal meeting metal. The townspeople came like family. The old welder who'd once lent Ethan his first torch crafted a flower arch from recycled steel pipes. A young girl, who who had lost her leg in an accident the year before, was the guest of honor, wearing the latest model designed by the couple. No one cried harder than the garage owner, who first introduced them. "Told you," he whispered, eyes red. "This old garage didn't just fix cars, it fixes lives." That night, as the party wound down and the guests headed home, Ethan tidied up fallen petals and cake crumbs. Ava sat by the window, moonlight spilling over her shoulder. She gazed quietly at the first prototype they had ever built, now encased in glass at the back of the workshop. Ethan joined her. "I used to think success meant IPOs, shares, awards. And now?" Ava asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "Now I know. Success is you walking strong on your own feet, and me walking beside you every step of the way." They sat in silence, surrounded by unfinished models and unnamed blueprints. But in that space, nothing felt incomplete anymore. Only two people, one dream, and a promise to keep walking, no matter what came next. Because the new leg wasn't just a device, it was a symbol of resilience, of love, and of a future not pre-designed, but created together, step by step. New mornings and the familiar scent of coffee. The wind chime above the workshop door jingled softly as the early morning breeze swept through, carrying the crisp scent of fresh pine and warm coffee from the lakeside cafe. Gentle golden sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Morgan Caldwell Innovation Center. Once an old garage, now a place where long-forgotten dreams found a second chance. Ethan Caldwell stood at the design table, squinting slightly at the 3D printer's control panel. His simple rolled-up shirt sleeves revealed a brand-new wedding band on his left hand. There was a peacefulness in his expression, like a man who had finally stepped off the racetrack of life and into a slower, but no less extraordinary, chapter. Ava Morgan appeared at the doorway, wearing the latest model of the athletic prosthetic they'd co-developed. She wore a soft gray cardigan over a white t-shirt and held 2 steaming paper cups of coffee, the steam curling gently in the angled morning light. "Reinforcements," she smiled, handing him his usual, black, 2 sugars, no cream. He grinned, taking it and brushing her fingers with his as if it were already habit. "Swear to God, there's no coffee out there that tastes better than yours." Ava raised an eyebrow. "I pressed a button at Lynn's Cafe, Ethan. That's what makes it." "Terrifying," he teased, planting a quick kiss on her forehead. They sat down together amid scattered designs, prototype parts, and the wooden frame that held their wedding photo, taken just outside the workshop beneath a new sign carved with pride. Morgan Caldwell Innovation Center. A year had passed since they first met. So much had changed, yet the most important things, kindness, trust, and the scent of morning coffee, remained the same. In the main lab, a group of engineering students buzzed around a bioprinted prosthetic prototype. Sarah, a student from Michigan, looked up and smiled as Ava and Ethan entered. "We figured out a way to reduce signal lag using a new optimization algorithm," she said, excitement radiating from her. "Let's see," Ethan replied, his eyes lighting up like a kid with a brand new toy. Ava leaned against the table, listening closely and asking all the right questions, just as she used to in those early late-night design sessions. A while later, Ethan turned to her. "Do you see it, Ava? They're doing exactly what we dreamed of, blending heart and intellect to build something better." Ava nodded, her eyes shimmering. "And this time, we're not doing it alone." That afternoon, after the lab cleared out, Ethan and Ava returned to the original workshop, still furnished with the old wooden table and soft yellow lamp from their earliest days. There, encased in glass at the back of the room, was the first prosthetic they ever built together. Ava gently touched the display case, a smile playing at her lips. "I remember that first night," she said softly. "You were welding that hydraulic joint, and I was trembling while giving directions. And you kept saying you weren't sure." Ethan laughed. "But you ended up giving the best solution of the night. Because I trusted the hands building it," she whispered. A warm silence fell between them, broken only by the creak of the window and the slow whir of the ceiling fan. Then Ava asked quietly, "Do you think we took the right path?" Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "I once built a medical empire with tech and market strategy. But what I never had, until you, was a dream anchored in real people. That evening, the center hosted a community gathering. Patients, engineers, students, and townsfolk all came to hear the stories behind the designs. A 12-year-old boy named Leo stepped on stage, walking confidently with an athletic limb developed by Ava's team, embedded with balance sensors. He hesitated briefly, then spoke into the mic. I used to think I'd never run again, but now I can. And I want to thank Mr. Ethan and MS. Ava, not just for helping me walk, but for helping me believe I could fly. The entire room rose in applause. Ethan and Ava exchanged a look, no words needed. In that moment, nothing more had to be said. Late that night, back in the office, Ethan hung up his coat. Ava sat by the window, the warm light from a desk lamp casting a soft glow on her face and highlighting the silver chain around her neck, with a familiar, tiny key still glinting. I used to be afraid of starting over, she whispered. But this place, the old shop, the sawdust nights, and the racing heartbeats, it saved me. Ethan knelt beside her. And you saved me from a life that was already mapped out. They held hands. No vows, no roadmap. Just two partners, continuing forward, step by steady step, on a path they chose together. Tomorrow would begin again with the chime of wind bells, the aroma of hot coffee, and a dream waiting to be built. One step further, a new generation. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the Morgan Caldwell Innovation Center. Once a humble garage, now the beating heart of a movement spreading across the country. Inside, a group of students from a Southwestern community college watched intently as Ava Morgan tested a new prosthetic limb on a ramp designed to simulate rugged terrain. She walked slowly at first, then picked up speed. Every step was a testament to recovery, to human-centered technology, something she and Ethan had built together with painstaking care. Down the hallway, display boards showcased their latest designs, dozens of prosthetic limbs numbered and labeled, each paired with a real user's story, from a veteran in Texas to an 8-year-old boy in Ohio. Behind the safety glass of the design room, Ethan stood cradling a thick notebook. Beside him was Lena, a young engineer who had just completed a scholarship program at the center. Model L, performed even better than expected, she said, glancing toward Ava. But we could improve traction by adjusting the contact material. Ethan nodded, pride evident in his eyes, not just for the progress of their work, but for the younger generation carrying the very ideals he once held at 20, when everything started with a simple idea and compassion. Elsewhere in the center, a group of veterans disassembled prosthetic models under the guidance of a technician. They shared experiences, technical tips, and the kinds of scars no one else could see. To them, this place wasn't just about devices. It was a home for understanding. Ava returned to the control room, her forehead dotted with sweat, but her smile radiant. It responds way smoother than the last model, she said, taking a seat beside Ethan. He gently wiped a bead of sweat from her brow, a small gesture filled with love. Watching you walk like that, Ethan said warmly, makes me believe anything's possible. Remember your first steps? Cold concrete in the garage. Ava laughed. I thought you were just some wandering mechanic with a soldering obsession. And you, Ethan chuckled, were just a stranger asking for help. But maybe that was the moment everything started. The chime at the front door rang. A group of visiting high schoolers had arrived. Kids full of questions, dreams, and hope. Ava stood, smoothed her hair, and took Ethan's hand. It's time to tell them our story. In the conference room, the chairs were arranged in a circle. No podiums, no microphones, just closeness. Ava spoke with emotion, not just about tech, but about fear, loss, and how two seemingly opposite people found each other and built something extraordinary. Technology isn't just in chips and circuits, she said, meeting the eyes of every young face. It starts in the heart, in the courage to recognize someone else's pain and decide to do something about it. A boy raised his hand. Did you ever think about giving up? Ava glanced at Ethan, then shook her head gently. Many times, but I've learned that hope is a habit. And if you practice it every day, it becomes stronger than despair. After the talk, the students lined up to shake hands with Ava and Ethan. A girl with round glasses quietly slipped a letter into Ava's hand. "I wrote about you in my STEM scholarship essay," she whispered. "You're the reason I want to become an engineer." Ava was too moved to speak. Ethan gently placed a hand on her back and whispered, "We're planting something bigger than technology." That afternoon, the center buzzed with life. The hum of 3D printers, the scribble of markers on sketch pads, and the laughter of students joking about their first test model losing its soul. In the office at the end of the hall, Ava hung a new photo on the wall. Her and Ethan surrounded by their first team beneath a sign that read, "We don't just build devices, we build opportunity." Later, as the day wound down and the last staff members left, a warm light glowed above the design table. Ethan and Ava sat side by side, looking toward the prototype enshrined in a glass case. "We've come a long way," Ava whispered. "But you're still the woman who walked into that garage with dreaming eyes," Ethan replied. "And you," she smiled, "are still the man who knew how to fix not just machines, but pieces of me I thought were broken." Outside, the stars glittered over the lakeside town. But within this space, between steel, motor oil, and hearts lit with purpose, there was a different kind of light. The light of hope, of a new generation inspired by first steps, by a love born in the unlikeliest of places, and by the belief that no matter how much the world changes, there will always be places and people who choose to begin again with all their heart. The sound of what's left unsaid. Mornings at the Morgan Caldwell Center always began with a strange kind of silence, a peaceful pause, as if the place itself were taking a quiet breath before the day began. It wasn't the kind of emptiness that felt lonely, but something warmer, filled with the echoes of stories long past, of people who had once lost hope and found it again within these walls. Ethan stood alone in the original workshop, no longer the polished CEO in a tailored suit as the media often portrayed him. Today he wore an old work jacket, holding a ceramic coffee mug hand-painted with an owl, a gift from a 12-year-old patient who'd received his first prosthetic just last month. He stared at the first prototype, the prosthetic that had started it all. It stood proudly on a small wooden pedestal next to the old workbench, a deep scratch on the heel from overuse during early testing. But to Ethan, it wasn't a flaw. It was a mark of courage. Soft wheels rolled behind him. "You always wake up before the sun," Ava said, leaning against the doorframe. She wore a gray hoodie and simple jeans, her hair tied up, no makeup, but to Ethan, she was the most beautiful woman in the world. "Only when it feels like the day's going to mean something," he replied, offering a quiet smile. Ava rolled closer and handed him a cup of coffee from the tray on her lap. "What's on your mind?" she asked gently. "You're not looking at that prototype like a designer. More like you're having a conversation with it." Ethan paused. "I'm thinking, if one day we're no longer here, will people understand the love built into every screw and joint? Or will they just see a well-engineered medical device?" Ava smiled, resting her hand on the old prosthetic's heel, gently tracing its scarred surface. "They might not hear it," she said softly, "but they'll feel it. Like that boy who cried the first time he ran. Or the veteran who hugged you after walking on the beach again. Those moments don't need words. They speak." Ethan nodded slowly and reached for her hand. "Then maybe we need to do one more thing." She tilted her head. "What?" "Write it down. Not just the specs and schematics. The real story of pain, rebirth, and the impossible choices we made." Ava was quiet for a moment. Her eyes glimmered with the weight of memory, the long nights in the hospital, the failed prototypes, the skeptical looks, and the day Ethan helped her stand again. "Who would read it?" she asked. "People at a crossroads," Ethan answered. "The ones who think they've lost everything. They need to know that sometimes all it takes is one person believing you still have something to give." She smiled, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "Then let's write it. But just so you know, I'm going to be a brutally honest editor." That afternoon, they sat in the glass-walled room behind the workshop, a small library-turned-meeting space. The first sketches still hung on the walls, now yellowed and curled at the edges. Ethan opened the laptop but didn't type. He spoke. Ava sat beside him, editing, adjusting phrasing, pausing now and then to ask, "What was your first thought when you saw me walk into the shop?" "I thought I'd been struck by lightning, in a hoodie holding a paper cup." "Be serious." "I was scared," he said softly. "Scared that if I took one step toward you, I'd never be able to walk away again." Ava stopped writing and looked at him for a long time. "And now," she asked, "would you go back if you could?" "No, because I found something worth stepping toward." Later that day, a group of final-year engineering students arrived for an internship tour. Ethan guided them through the center, stopping at the athletic prosthetic Ava had last tested the week before. One student asked, "Why don't you file for global patents to protect your design?" Ethan smiled. "We do protect it, but sometimes the most valuable thing isn't intellectual property, it's shared purpose. Open source design allows others to learn. As long as they uphold the core values, safety, humanity, and honesty, it's worth it." Ava entered just then, guiding a 10-year-old girl named Lily, braided hair, rosy cheeks, a new patient. "Lily wants to attach her trial leg herself," Ava explained, "and she refuses to let anyone help but Ethan." The students laughed as Ethan gave in with a dramatic sigh. He knelt beside Lily, his large hand gently guiding her small fingers as she gripped the screwdriver. "Do you even know what you're doing?" "I watched your video on YouTube 3 times, Lily replied confidently. Laughter echoed across the room. Ethan glanced at Ava. Their eyes met in a wordless understanding. They were exactly where they needed to be. That night, after locking up and saying goodbye to the students, Ethan and Ava returned to the workshop. On the table lay the first printed copy of their new book, From Workshop to Heart. "I think we should add a chapter about what happens when everything falls apart," Ava said. "Why?" "So readers know, success isn't the real treasure. What matters most is what we keep in our hearts when everything else fades." Ethan took her hand and pressed it gently to his chest. "Then that chapter will say, when everything fell apart, I still had you, and I still had hope." Ava said nothing. She just rested her head on his shoulder as the golden lamp cast its soft glow around them, like a quiet blessing from the place that had pieced them back together. Once again from the ashes, rain pattered gently against the tin roof of the Morgan Caldwell Innovation Center, sounding like the rhythmic pulse of Ethan's own heart. He stood before a whiteboard, covered edge to edge in notes, detailed diagnostics on micro-failures discovered in over 5,000 units of their newest assisted limb generation. "The fault's not in the design," Ava said from the desk behind him. Her voice wasn't angry. It carried the weight of quiet disappointment. "It's the Tier 3 alloy steel. The supplier switched production lines without notifying us." Ethan turned around, eyes tired but still burning with determination under the halogen lights. "I know," he said, "and I know what we have to do." Ava looked up. They didn't need to debate it. Whether as a CEO or an engineer, a pioneer or a survivor, Ava had always put people before profit. "Full recall," she said firmly. Ethan nodded. Full recall. It was a decision worth millions of dollars. But it was also what had built Morgan Caldwell from the very beginning. Trust. Within 48 hours, the entire center mobilized. Shipments were halted. Urgent emails went out to every customer, clinic, and rehab center across the country. "I'll go on camera myself," Ava said, looking straight into the webcam as the marketing team assembled virtually. "We take full responsibility, and we'll rebuild, free of charge, with a better version." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "And this time, we personally inspect every batch of material." News spread fast. The press called it the trust crisis of the prosthetic renaissance. Financial channels estimated damages at $42 million. Some investors started asking hard questions. But the very next day, something no one expected happened. A video went viral. An Army veteran standing in his living room, wearing Morgan Caldwell prosthetics, saying, "I lost both legs to a landmine. Ava Morgan didn't just help me walk. She helped me live again." Then came a single mother holding her 3-year-old son, saying, "If someone makes a mistake but stands up to fix it, I'll trust them more than someone who's never tried at all." Ethan's office became a war room. Cold coffee, Sleepless eyes, rolled up sleeves. He reviewed every shipment, reread every supply contract, highlighting clauses that should have been enforced sooner. You know, Ava said, sitting on the floor beside the parts rack, I once thought that accident was the end. Ethan said nothing. But today, when we chose to start over, I remembered, what sets us apart isn't avoiding failure. It's how we face it. He knelt beside her, took her calloused but warm hand. I love you not because you never fall, he whispered, but because you always rise, and you pull me up with you. The following week, volunteer engineering students arrived, asking for unpaid internships. A military hospital in Texas sent a letter reaffirming their partnership, despite delays. At the industry's largest medical conference, Ava stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. She wore a simple dress, but on her leg was the newest prototype, assembled from materials they personally approved and tested. We made a mistake, she said, and because we did, we'll make it right. Not because of policy, but because of trust. Ethan sat in the front row, eyes red but dry. He knew that in that moment, their company wasn't just saved, it had grown stronger through honesty. That evening, they sat on the old wooden bench behind the workshop. The morning's rain had given way to a golden sunset that soaked the lakeside horizon. Ava leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. You know, she whispered, I never thought I'd fall in love again, until my car broke down and I walked into your grimy garage. Ethan chuckled softly. And I never thought I'd design another prosthetic. I thought my heart froze the day my dad died. She turned to him. So, we were both wrong. The best kind of wrong, he replied, kissing her forehead. Inside the lab, the lights still glowed. Engineers worked late, marking weld lines, inspecting every joint. A new banner had been hung on the wall. We don't promise perfection, but we always promise to make it right. Beneath it was the first photo ever taken of Ethan and Ava, handing their prototype to a young patient. The picture wasn't high resolution, but the light in it was unmistakable. It was the light of hope. And from that day forward, Ethan knew failure was never the end. It was the chance to prove they were worthy of the trust they'd been given. Steps that refused to stay silent. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Morgan Caldwell Innovation Center, casting golden ribbons across the polished wood floor. Ethan stood on the second floor walkway, coffee in hand, watching a loop of videos playing on the screens in the ground floor test room, where a group of veterans, young amputees, and an 8-year-old girl with her very first prosthetic leg were learning to walk, soft music playing from the ceiling speakers. On the large wall screen was the emblem of their newest campaign, Walk with Dignity. Every step tells a story. No stage lights, no voiceovers, just raw, unfiltered footage, trembling but determined, unpolished but heartbreakingly beautiful, of people who once believed they'd never walk again. Ava appeared beside him, unnoticed at first, tablet in hand, hair loosely pinned, a few strands framing her cheek. Noah just sent his second clip, she said, smiling softly. This time he's walking to school. No more wheelchair. Ethan turned to her. I still remember the first time you cried watching one of those. I didn't cry, Ava teased, nudging his elbow. Just dust in my eye. They laughed, but Ethan's gaze grew tender. Ava, I never thought a campaign could change so much. Not the product, but the feeling. She nodded. Because this time, it's not us speaking. It's them. The ones who fell, stood up, and decided to tell the world. Walk with Dignity had started as a crisis response, a way to reaffirm their values after the massive recall. But as it grew, Ava realized it wasn't just a campaign. It was a movement. Instead of funding flashy media buys, they built a modest studio inside the center, where patients could share their stories. No scripts, no retakes, just one camera, one wooden chair, and the prosthetic that helped them stand again. A single mother recounted the day her son asked, Mom, when can you play ball with me again? An old soldier said, I thought the battlefield had taken everything. Turns out, there are still people who give so others can move forward. And a bright-eyed 10-year-old boy declared, I'm not afraid of falling, because now I can stand up on my new legs. Ava reviewed each clip, adjusting lighting, trimming the ends, but never touched the truth in them. "We don't need to speak for them," she said. "They do it better than any media team ever could." That weekend, Ava and Ethan attended a local community fair in Asheville, where a group of their patients had set up an impromptu exhibit. No flashy banners, just a cloth sign draped diagonally. "Technology from the heart." Town residents gathered around as a young woman with pink-dyed hair took the small stage and said, "I was denied jobs because I walked with a limp. But today, I'm standing here to tell you, don't give up hope." The applause drowned out the sound system. Ethan gently squeezed Ava's hand. "You know, you were the very first video of this campaign." She raised an eyebrow. "The day you walked across the workshop floor without help. The day you stood up with nothing but faith. That's when I knew we had to start with something real." Ava was quiet for a moment, then rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for believing in me, even when I wanted to disappear." He held her hand tighter. "You never needed to hide. You were always the light." A month later, the campaign had grown beyond expectations. No longer just a few clips, it was now a digital archive. The Walk with Dignity library, where hundreds of people uploaded their journeys from despair to hope. Boston Medical School began using the videos to teach medical ethics. An indie film studio proposed a docuseries. Even the Department of Veterans Affairs reached out, asking to integrate Ethan's prosthetic designs into their reintegration programs for disabled veterans. "I thought we were just making prosthetic legs," Ava said one afternoon as they watched interns training in the test center. "But we're helping people walk again, in every sense of the word." Ethan smiled, eyes glowing with something deeper. "Ava, we're not just building devices. We're stitching together lives that were once left behind." She studied him for a long moment. "Then who's going to stitch you back together?" The man who forgot his first dream in a sea of spreadsheets and shareholders. He paused, then pulled her into his chest. "You are Ava. You reminded me that invention doesn't live on paper. It starts in the heart." That night, Ava sat thoughtfully reviewing the blueprint of a new athletic limb model. "Ethan, I've got an idea. Instead of just manufacturing, let's teach communities how to assemble them. For those who can't afford one, let them build their own with our engineer support." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "An open source program?" Ava nodded. "We can't be everywhere, but if we share knowledge, these steps can reach where the light doesn't." Ethan laughed. "You're making me fall in love with you all over again." "All over again?" she teased. "I never stopped," he replied, kissing her forehead, where the lines of effort and love had carved their place. When the Walk with Dignity homepage hit 1,000,000 shares, there was no ribbon cutting, no party. Ethan and Ava simply stood before the original prosthetic, the one still on display in the corner of the old workshop. Ava ran her hand gently along the worn metal, eyes misting. "No one thought this would take us so far." Ethan placed his hand on her shoulder. "When it starts from the heart, anything is possible." In the soft evening light between the old workshop and the new center, between memory and vision, they stood side by side, two halves of the same journey. A journey where every step, whether shaky or strong, whispered one unshakable truth. You deserve a full life, no matter where you begin again. A legacy carried forward. Golden afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of the Morgan Caldwell Innovation Center, casting honey-hued beams across the raw brick walls. From test area 3 came the sound of laughter. A curly-haired boy who had lost his right leg at 6 was now running. Yes, running. On the latest generation of athletic prosthetics. Ethan stood off to the side, arms folded, eyes slightly misty. That boy, Jordan, used to fear he'd never play sports again after the accident. Now, each powerful stride was living proof of what he and Ava had poured their hearts into, technology that restored trust, not just function. "I think I'm going to win the baseball game today," Jordan shouted over his shoulder, his eyes sparkling like summer sunlight. Ava, seated nearby in her wheelchair, clapped and cheered. Her hair was tied back, her face radiant in the fading light, and her new prosthetic, co-developed with Ethan, moved fluidly with every gesture. Beside her, A health magazine journalist scribbled furiously, barely believing what she was witnessing. After last week's press conference, orders had flooded in from 38 states. But what brought Ava the most joy weren't the numbers. It was the handwritten letters arriving each morning. From mothers, veterans, teachers, people who once felt they had no place left in the world. Now they were standing, walking, living again. Ethan approached and handed her a water bottle before sitting beside her in silence. No words were needed. Their eyes said enough. Ava gently squeezed his hand and turned back to Jordan, now collapsed in laughter on the floor, breathless and beaming. I used to think losing a part of your body meant losing a part of yourself, Ava whispered, eyes never leaving the child. But watching Jordan, I see myself, and I see my father too. Ethan remained quiet. Ava's father, founder of Morgan Technologies, had died when she was young, leaving behind an empire she once tried to escape. Now, she was rebuilding it her own way. No boardrooms, no power plays, just heart and truth. I think he'd be proud of you, Ethan said softly, brushing a stray hair from her cheek. Not just because you were reimagining Morgan, but because you chose to live with kindness. Ava smiled, eyes glistening. And you, Ethan Caldwell, the man who left skyscrapers behind to rent a corner in a dusty old garage. Do you ever regret it? He chuckled. I used to think success meant a product worth millions. But then I met you. I met Jordan. I read a letter from an elderly woman in Utah thanking us because she could finally walk into her garden after 10 years. And I knew this is what success really looks like. They sat quietly for a while, letting the breeze of late afternoon wrap around them like a shared memory. A staff member approached. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a young woman from New Hampshire here. She didn't schedule an appointment, but she says she's a special case. Ethan and Ava exchanged a glance, then stood. They had long since learned not to turn away special cases. In the waiting area, a woman in her early 20s sat by the window, hair cropped short, her left leg amputated above the knee and wrapped in an old knit scarf. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with the unmistakable light of someone who had fallen, but never surrendered. I'm Lucy, she said as Ethan and Ava approached. I know I'm not part of your free trial program, but I read about Walk with Dignity, and I just wanted to ask, if I sit here long enough, is there a chance I might walk again someday? The question caught in Ava's throat. Ethan knelt beside her. Have you ever tried a prosthetic before? Lucy shook her head. I work at a bakery. Insurance won't cover it. I've saved for nearly a year, but I'm still short. I'm not here to beg, just to hope. Ava sat next to her, placing a gentle hand on hers. We don't just make devices, she whispered. We rebuild hope, even when it walks in with no appointment. Ethan looked to the staff member and nodded. Add her to the next trial group. Schedule her first fitting for next week. Lucy gasped. Really? But I haven't paid anything. You've paid with courage, Ava said, smiling. That's enough. As the young woman left, shoulders shaking with quiet emotion, Ethan took Ava's hand. We're going to need a bigger design room if we're going to keep up. And probably more morning coffee, she grinned, resting her head on his shoulder. They stood together, surrounded by the glow of innovation, not just in steel or carbon fiber, but in the repaired hearts around them. Hearts once shattered, now welded back with something stronger than alloy. Love, trust, and unshakable human dignity. And so the journey continued. Not just of technology, not just of love, but of a living legacy built from the very first steps of those who once believed they'd never rise again, quietly passing on the light. That spring arrived earlier than usual in a lakeside town. The peach tree behind the Morgan Caldwell Innovation Center bloomed its first delicate petals, while the sunlight remained gentle and the breeze still crisp. In the main courtyard, students from the first design cohort were finishing up modular prosthetic models, a new initiative inspired by Ethan and Ava's original blueprint. Upstairs in a quiet meeting room with a window overlooking the lake, Ava Morgan, now legally and in every sense Mrs. Morgan Caldwell, sat watching a video on her aging tablet. It showed a 12-year-old boy, once a refugee, who had lost his leg to a leftover landmine. Now, he was running across his California schoolyard with joyful abandon, using a prosthetic scent from their center. Each stride radiated happiness, and Ava, eyes glistening, gently touched the screen, as if trying to hold on to that moment forever. Crying again? Ethan's voice teased softly behind her, as light as the breeze. Ava turned, smiling, eyes slightly red. Not crying, just grateful. Ethan sat beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, just as he had every morning for years. I printed this video to frame it for the award ceremony next week. It's not just his achievement, it's ours. Ava nodded slowly. You know, part of me is always afraid. Afraid that one day, this might all disappear. That the ideas were only temporary. Ethan squeezed her hand. But you were the one who said, "We don't make products. We reignite hope." They gazed out toward the courtyard, where young engineers, many of them former patients, were now teaching high schoolers how to install control chips in a 3D printed limbs. Each had their own way of doing it, but all carried the same spirit, passing on the light. Ava set down the tablet and quietly reached into the drawer for a small silver key, the symbol of the old workshop, the symbol of their beginning. Do you think it's time to pass this key to the next generation? Ethan looked at her for a long moment. If we do, it's because we trust them, not because we're stepping away. She smiled gently. We never step away. That afternoon, in the main hall before a crowd gathered for the next creator's ceremony, Ava took the stage, not as a founder, but as the spiritual mother of a movement. This key, she said, raising it so it shimmered in the spotlight, once opened the door to a man who saw value in a broken device, and in a woman who thought she was broken too. The room went still. Today I pass it to the next generation, not to relive our story, but to write their own. Because the future isn't born from wealth or tech. It begins with kindness that never goes out of style. In the front row, Ethan watched her with quiet pride. He knew this wasn't an ending. It was a new chapter, written by hearts once healed, now healing others. That evening, like most evenings, Ethan and Ava sat in the corner of the old lakeside cafe. Her cup was still warm milk espresso. His the same black coffee, no sugar. They had long since grown used to bitterness, and to turning it sweet by sharing it. Ava leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. I never imagined we'd come this far, back when we first stepped into that dusty old workshop. Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of silver from her hair. I just thought I was fixing a hydraulic joint. I never expected you'd fix my heart. Outside, the lights of the innovation center still glowed, but they no longer shone with the sterile brightness of technology. They shimmered with the quiet light of hope, passed on hand to hand, smile to smile, step by proud step. The story of Ethan and Ava, of a CEO who had lost his passion and a wounded engineer who once gave up on herself, didn't end here. It lived on in every person they touched, because true legacy isn't measured in titles or possessions. It's in the power to awaken goodness in others. And in the corner of the old workshop, where it all began, the first prototype still rested. No longer just a device, but a gentle reminder that from love and belief, people can rebuild the world. When hope is assembled by hand and heart. The story of Ethan Caldwell and Ava Morgan isn't just a tender love song between two people who had once stumbled. It's a timeless reflection on human value, rebirth after crisis, and the courage to believe in something good, even when life seems to have closed every door. At a stage in life when many believe their defining days are behind them, when value feels like a word reserved for the young, fast, and creative, Ethan, a once successful CEO who lost his way in a maze of reputation and responsibility, found true passion not in a glass tower, but in a dusty old workshop by the lake. And Ava, a woman who once walked unsteadily on a prosthetic leg, became a symbol of recovery for an entire generation. What they built wasn't a technological marvel. It was a conscious choice to live by heart. In today's world, we're surrounded by speed. Fast is praised. Everything must be upgraded, downsized, market-ready. But in the rush of numbers and metrics, people are growing lonelier. How many of us have been like Ethan, successful, yet lost? Or like Ava, brilliant, but choosing silence just to stay true to ourselves? Their story reminds us, sometimes the most valuable things aren't part of a 10-year business plan. They're found in a quiet moment, a nod of support, a late-night project built not for profit, but for the heart of someone who simply needs to be seen. They started again, not with capital, but with sincerity. And when the world around them cracked from a technical error, Ethan and Ava didn't point fingers. They chose honesty. They chose to recall every flawed product, knowing it would cost them millions. Because in Ava's words, you can rebuild money, but lose trust, and you've lost everything. It was a profoundly human choice, one that feels rare in an age where trust is often traded for profit. Their story reminds us of dignity, that people with disabilities don't need pity, they need respect. They need technology not just to survive, but to live fully, to walk on real or artificial legs, with heads held high. More than that, Ethan and Ava showed us, love doesn't end at 40, 50, or 60. Love can still knock on the door of a rundown garage, sneak in through the clinking of metal, return with each morning coffee and every debate about torque calibration. Real love, quiet, steady, can be strong enough to revive a person, a dream, and even a community. So what's the lesson for us? That anyone, at any age, can begin again. That passion doesn't come with an expiration date. That kindness, even small, can be the spark that keeps hope alive. And that if you've ever found yourself wondering, what do I still have to offer this world? Maybe it's time to sit down like Ethan once did, reopen an old design, a dusty notebook, or simply listen to someone's story, and start with two simple words, I believe. Because who knows? Like Ethan and Ava, you may rediscover something that's been quietly sleeping inside you for far too long. And all it takes is the right hand reaching out to awaken it. We don't all need to be CEOs or engineers. We just need to be the kind of person who sees value where others haven't dared to look. And when that light spreads, like the old silver key once passed on, it doesn't just open one door. It opens a future, written in compassion. Before we go, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from the heartland of America, a quiet countryside, or maybe a bustling city dreaming of open fields? Drop a comment. Below, I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, inspired you, or simply gave you a moment of warmth in your day, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so that you never miss another uplifting story like this. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.